about 29 countries throughout the world. And my background is that I have my master's in social welfare from the University of California at Berkeley. And I was a social worker in child protective services in Northern California for a few years. And then I joined the world of international education, first as a teacher, then as a school level administrator. And this is my 6th year in my current role, overseeing child protection at all of our schools. And I'm super happy to have, within the past couple of years, become an ICMEC regional trainer, as is my colleague, Perry Awad, who will now introduce herself and get us started.
Hello, everyone from around the world. Thank you for joining us today. As Debbie mentioned, my name is Perry Awad. I am currently the Director of Human Resources at the American School in Dubai. I've spent the last 20 plus years of my career in the Middle East and in the MENA region specifically, in an HR position. I have a master's certificate in strategic HR management from Michigan State University, where I grew up. I grew up in Michigan, not in the university. And I'm a senior certified professional through the Society for Human Resources Management. So HR is my field, but I've worked in schools for the vast majority of my career, and I can't think of a better place I'd rather be. Was born in Egypt, grew up in Michigan, as you just heard. And I have, my husband and I have 2 grown children, they're adults, and we're here in Dubai with our 3 puppies, who you might hear. So I apologize in advance. They're beagles and they're loud. Debbie and I.
Apology, everyone at my house is home, including 2 dogs. So same apology on this end.
So Debbie and I are among the first cohort of regional child protection trainers, and we work obviously through ICMEC. And one of the reasons why we're here is that we're very passionate about this topic. We've both had roles, as you heard Debbie mentioned. She's the child protection lead. In my role, I pulled up programs and I make sure that we follow certain policies that help to protect children, including safer hiring and so on. So we'd like to start today by very quickly sharing our objectives with you so that you know what we hope to accomplish in our time together. As you can see up here on the slide, we'll give you a very quick introduction to ICMEC because we can't assume you know what it is and what the goals are. And then we'll walk through some global and some statistics that really will help us frame the work that we have to do and why it's so important for us to continue to advocate for children and their safety. We'll dive right into the topic of low-level concerns and talk more about what it is, how to handle and mitigate the risks, and what we can do as educators as we examine our roles and the schools that we work for in supporting children. And then we will also engage you in some cases that you can help think about and walk through, cases that are based on real life cases, but they've of course been anonymized. We're hoping that we will along the way obviously watch the chat, and we will provide some opportunities for questions. If this group remains small like it is, we will have plenty of opportunities to take your questions and engage in discussions and conversations. So thank you for that. Before we start though, I do want to go through the Safe Space Agreement. And the Safe Space Agreement is basically anytime we talk about a topic that's difficult, it's very important for us to recognize that among us today are survivors and supporters of survivors of childhood abuse. It's okay to experience strong emotions throughout our conversations. As adults, our resilience varies, and there could be triggers that bring some emotions that we need to handle. So please, please feel free to step away and take care of yourself. No one's going to ask you why you dropped out, where you went. It's really more important for you to engage safely and to, take care of your own self. Our beliefs come from our experiences. So as we talk about this subject today and maybe even unpack some of the case studies, please remember that you can obviously reflect on our stories and experiences, but never share experiences and stories that are not our own. And when we do share them, we always maintain confidentiality and anonymity and not share someone's story without asking them. Debbie and I will commit to, a judgment-free zone, free of discriminatory language. Feel free to remind us if we unintentionally step away from that. But we again invite you to engage with us today in this difficult subject safely and taking care of yourself. So what is ICMEC? That's a really good place for us to start. So ICMEC basically is the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's an international NGO that was founded in April of 1999, and they have many, many goals, but the two overarching goals are, first is to represent the best interest of our world's children, and the second goal is to recommend best-in-class child protection standards to be implemented around the globe. And so in those two overarching interests and goals, they have lots of programs, and they invest in many, many things. So they invest in law enforcement's work with missing children, particularly to find and bring them home. They invest in the disruption of the economies that support exploitation of children. And they also invest in bringing information and resources and training to schools just like yours and ours, so that together we can build communities that protect children. And of course, that starts in our schools. They also support regional trainers. Debbie and I are two examples. I mentioned that there's 8 in this first cohort, and hopefully they're building more and more so that there can be more people to support. And we're here. I can speak for Debbie. I know I can speak for Debbie when I say that we're both here because we not only believe in those goals, but we're very beautifully aligned with and passionate about keeping our children safe. And we know you are too, because you're here taking time out of your schedules. So let's start with some numbers. And those numbers really help us with perspective on why our work is so important. You can obviously see the statistics in front of you here, but really important to reflect on them. So commercial sexual exploitation is a business around the world, and it generates $99 billion per year. That's mind-boggling. So there are adults and businesses that actually benefit and have a vested interest in keeping some practices that harm children alive and well. There's been a global increase of online abuse that children have been impacted by. This has specifically been compounded by the impact of the pandemic. As we all know, children have been isolated in many cases. Sometimes they've been sequestered at home with their abusers at times, and they've lost trusted adults who are around them who can help them and can notice the low-level concerns and other concerns. So that has impacted children. It's estimated that this number will continue to increase. The US authorities predict 106% increase in child sexual materials that's generated online. Grooming has increased, again, also globally, and children are more and more, they're being coerced to participate in online sexual abuse, either at their own will, or of course they're being forced to. And the gaming platforms have been used also for those purposes. And more importantly, and what's very important for us to know, is that in all countries in the world and all cultures, abuse is underreported. And so that's very important for us. It will frame our thinking about why it is very important for us to be there to support kids, but also to look for those low-level concerns. The UNICEF is another organization that cares deeply about children. And I'm sure you all know what UNICEF is, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, and their life's work is to take care of kids and keep them safe. Again, they also produce numbers and they publish them. And again, you can see up here what children are subjected to is shocking. Again, I don't want to go through and read every single one, but some things that resonate with me every time I look at those statistics and will resonate with you as well in schools. Over 1 in 3 students aged 13 to 15 experience bullying worldwide. That's That's pretty significant. And only 10% of children worldwide are protected from corporal punishment. That's a real number. If you just go on their websites, you can see all the statistics. 650 million girls and women around the world today have been married as children, and over 200 million have been subjected to female genital mutilation. We can spend 2 more hours separately to talk about just the impact of culture and context and and practices that are acceptable but are harmful to children. But those are just a couple that you can see right here. So obviously this leads right into our roles and why it's so important for us to be trusted adults for children. So when you're a trusted adult for a child, this really means that you are committing to your ethical duty and your duty of care. And what that is that in every school, in every country, almost every single country around the world, as educators, you have the legal duty to protect children and to be a reporter. So that's very important. So that's your legal duty, but your other duty that comes from a place of passion and care and duty of care is to support building the ethos of prevention. The ethos of prevention is built when adults make a commitment to follow policies and procedures officially and unofficially to protect children. By doing that, we become the gatekeepers of that culture of prevention. And what we're trying to prevent, obviously, is any harm and abuse to children. What comes along with that is many, many things, but we'll talk about low-level concerns and reporting today. But one thing that we don't really dive into today that I encourage you to think about is really understanding the signs of abuse, because there are very specific signs that as educators, maybe your counselors, maybe your teachers, maybe you're even instructional assistants, board members, anybody who works in a school community, understanding signs of abuse is very powerful because it can help prevent abuse. And so then we'll move on over to Debbie, I believe.
Yes. So I think Perry said this, but I know a couple people have joined while Perry was speaking. We are front loading some information here before we give a chance for you all to go to breakout rooms and have some discussions. So if we're rushing through something and you have a question, please do put it in the chat, because Perry's monitoring the chat and will answer any questions that we see in there. So what does it mean, a rights-based approach to child protection? The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child outlines the rights-based approach clearly. Nearly all countries have ratified and signed this document, so it's a really great starting place if you have questions about how you should start addressing a concern about a child. It's important for us to know these rights should be protected, not granted. Children were born with these rights. And if the rights of children are protected, then those children have a greater chance to develop in a healthy environment. Why is it important for us to protect children's rights? There's many reasons. I'm going to share a few reasons and perspectives, but I'd love to hear more from you in the chat if you want to add to what I'm sharing. Children might not be able to advocate for themselves. They might be unable to recognize risks or cope with the effects. They're less able to defend themselves. They're weaker and more vulnerable to abuse, exploitation, and trauma. They can be less resilient to harmful experiences. They can't access help without an adult. They're still developing their moral compasses. They might be unclear on right and wrong. They might lack understanding of the long-term impacts or consequences of their behavior. They're dependent upon adults for their needs, and they have less control and choice in their lives. Any questions about that or anything that you want to add? Feel free to put it in the chat, or since we're a smaller group than we thought, you're welcome to unmute and say something. Okay, I'll move on, but do feel free to use the chat if you need to. So let's talk for a minute about harm. A child can be harmed directly, indirectly, or potentially. It's a child protection concern if a child was harmed, or if an action or inaction caused a child to be harmed, if an action or inaction put a child at risk of harm, or if someone attempted harm or incited others to harm a child. So just to be super clear, directly, indirectly, or potentially, an adult can cause harm to a child. I'll give you a moment to read over these definitions of abuse. This is what we work from at ICMEC, so this is what we'll be using as our definitions of abuse today. And just to add to this, the World Health Organization defines abuse broadly. It includes all forms of abuse: physical, emotional, sexual, neglect, negligent treatment, exploitation. Really, it's anything that threatens a child's health, survival, well-being, and/or dignity. Abuse and violence against children happen in every culture, country, and context. Children who are vulnerable are more likely to experience violence, abuse, and harm, and the impact upon them is compounded. It's important to remember that all forms of abuse and violence against children are preventable. And that's why we want to talk to you about low-level concerns today. I can barely see my buttons now. There we go. So we want to examine low-level concerns with adults within our communities and our schools. So what is a low-level concern and why is it important to understand this? A low-level concern is basically a situation where a behavior or action toward a child is not quite right, but you don't feel it's serious enough to report. It can be a concern about a child's behavior also. You might notice some changes in a child's behavior that make you wonder what's going on, but the child isn't ready to tell you if they're being harmed, and your observations don't meet the threshold for reporting. It's not uncommon for us to hesitate to report. We might be concerned about a colleague who we know well and we can't imagine that they mean harm. We might be worried about ruining someone's life or career. We might be thinking something was shared in confidence and we don't want to breach that confidence. The list of reasons not to report goes on. However, it's important to know the facts. The facts are that adults who intentionally harm children have a history of crossing boundaries, a pattern of repeated concerns that don't meet the threshold, and breaking rules in smaller, big ways. They groom children and they groom the environment and the adults around them to ensure there's enough doubt about their intentions. Then the lines are blurred and sometimes behaviors are brushed off just because the person's just like that. And Perry's going to talk some more about grooming in just a few minutes. One of the most important things we can do is align our school culture and build trust so that we have a village of trusted adults who prioritize children over other relationships and over the school's reputation. We're hoping to establish a culture at schools where every concern is reported, because the question isn't what if I'm wrong and there isn't a problem here, but the question is what if I'm right? What's the difference between a low-level concern and an allegation? So a low-level concern is simply a concern. It's a question. Is there a problem here? There's no need for evidence. It doesn't need to be substantiated. It's important to establish a culture where people feel comfortable sharing when something just doesn't look or feel right. Low-level concerns should be documented at the school level. An allegation is raised up to the next level of reporting. An allegation is made when it's alleged that an adult has behaved in a way that harmed a child or may have harmed a child. It indicates an action that's criminal in nature or that poses a risk of harm to a child. The term allegation indicates a serious accusation and it should involve law enforcement. I'm gonna hand it over to Perry at this point to talk some more about how to handle low-level concerns.
Thank you, Debbie. So can you hear me?
Yeah, are you okay if we, I see a hand up here. Is it okay?
Yes, let's go with the hand. I mean, it's a small group, so we do want to make sure that it's interactive and we take your questions.
Okay.
So you can unmute yourself if your hand is up.
I hope I'm saying your name right. Drakey?
No, you do it perfectly. No, I just want to know, do you have statistics on the percentage of false reports?
False reports. I actually was just in a training with Dr. Jordan Greenbaum, who does amazing work on working with children, and it's less than 3%.
And often when it's a false report, it has factors that you can, It's not just a child out of nowhere making a false report. It might be a parent making a report about another parent because they're in a bitter custody dispute.
Yeah.
What are some other things, Perry? Like
it could be like a neighbor who is upset with their neighbor and they report. So less than 3%, and I believe when you pare it down to actual false allegations from a child, it's closer to 1.5%. And then there are other reasons why maybe adults didn't get it right, or someone reported on behalf of a child and it wasn't accurate. So that's a really good question, and I'm so glad that you asked the question.
mm-hmm.
Because disclosures, and listen to this, when you have a disclosure that has come forward from a student, you should come from a place of believing. A place of believing means that you should act, because they're very rare and they're often false. They're rarely false. So it's really important to know that.
And it's far more likely, maybe Perry, you know the stats on this, but I know that it's way more likely that a child will recant a true report than make a false report.
Yeah, so again, when you unpack the trauma-informed process to handle disclosures, yes, it's very important. Handling the child and the questions and gathering information is very important, because children often don't believe that you'll believe them. And so when they're pressured for many, many reasons, whether it's the family that's ashamed that they're going to bring this, shame to their family, or if adults are pressuring them because Mr. So-and-so or this neighbor will never do that to you, they will often recant, or they'll clamp up, to be frank, and then it's really hard to get to the bottom of the issue. So I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the
Sorry,
chat.
Perry, there's one more hand up. Camille, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, hi, good morning, thank you. I was just wondering if you happen to have any statistics or any facts about the amount of false reports in terms of peer-on-peer, or is that really more contextual according to age group? Or, I mean, any information about that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name. I don't have those statistics with me now. Thank you. I don't have those statistics with me now. But the statistics that we shared are general statistics related to children reporting on adults, if that makes sense. And it is contextual when you're thinking of peer-on-peer. That's a little bit different. But we can, maybe Debbie and I can find information, and if this presentation is being shared with you, we can share those relevant statistics a little bit later.
Yeah.
Right. I'm looking at the chat, and I hope I didn't miss anything. Are there any more hands that are going up, or did we miss a question?
No, you can continue.
Okay, great. And Laura, if you can help us watch that, because every question is important, and you bring up very good points. So when you handle low-level concerns, there's a difference between how you handle the concerns as a first responder. Unless you are a child protection lead or the person that's designated by your school, I'm very aware that schools have very different structures in place. Some people have a very specific person assigned, and in some places it's still a work in progress. We're all on our own journeys, that's okay. But unless you are the person that's identified by your school to receive and handle concerns, then all of us are first responders, except for Debbie here, because Debbie is a designate. But right alongside of you, I'm also a first responder. And what that means is that our job is to share any concerns that we have. So we are the people who may be the first person on campus at the school that notices a concern. And the concern can be something that happens right at school in your presence. It could be a concern that has come from multiple sources. So it doesn't have to be official. It could be verbal, it could be written, it could be through social media, it could be an official source. So it's really any concern that you have, and you may be the first person who's noticing that concern. Does that make sense? So what you do when the concern comes your way, and it can be through multiple channels. Your job as a first responder is to determine if that is a concern. So Debbie shared with you a little bit earlier that A low-level concern is just a feeling that you have that something isn't right. Your job isn't to gather information, investigate, corroborate before you report. Your job is to first make sure that you do feel that it's a concern and then do something about it. So doing something about it will be very different depending on what your concern is. If you're concerned about how an adult in your school or around you has behaved, or language that has been used in your presence that doesn't feel right, somebody who's crossed the boundary, maybe did something that's outside the boundaries of your code of conduct, a behavior on a school trip, something like that, then that is very easy to report, because then you don't have to worry about whether something else was going on. That's a low-level concern. Reporting it right away because you don't feel that it's right is your duty, and that's your job. Someone else will then follow through and make sure that it's either a real concern and an inquiry is launched, or they'll get to the bottom of it, report it, and move on. Make sense? If you're noticing something with a child, you may want to ask a couple questions depending on what you see, so that you yourself can identify if you feel that it's a concern. So let's say you see your student, Sarah, with a black eye. So would you be concerned? I mean, I'm concerned that she's hurt, but I don't know if that concern is anything more than maybe an accident on the playground. But let's say, in a week or in 2 weeks, she has another bruise or a different bruise, or you saw her 2 weeks earlier with, a bruise on her arm. Then you might want to, try to get some information so that you can determine if something is going on or not. When you do that, it's really important to understand your children. So one of the best things that you can do to protect kids is to know your kids. And so developmentally, the questions that you ask will be different, because their brains develop, of course, as you know, they're not as developed when they're younger. So the way that they remember information and share it will sound a little bit different. So when you question and you try to ask and understand, the best thing to do is ask open-ended questions, so that you're not leading a child into saying something that you're not, maybe using your own words that they have a different interpretation of what you're saying. Yes and no questions are a little bit harder as well. And definitely any leading questions you should avoid. So things like, tell me more about, or what happened here, just broad and open-ended, so that you can try, you yourself at this point, you're just trying to figure out if you have a cause to be concerned. So we're not digging deeper here. If we're not quite sure, you're going to watch a student, you might want to go get some advice from someone else. If you determine that something just isn't right, the child tells you, my brother was chasing me, or something that then maybe causes you to think that something else was going on, then you report it. So it's that simple. You're a first responder, you're watching. If something doesn't sit right, feel right, you might ask a question or so, still think it's a concern, then you go tell someone. And then, so that distinguishes your role from that someone that you're going to talk to. And that someone that you talk to will be, if you have a structure, it'll be your child protection designate. If you don't have a structure in place, then you go to your administrator. And then their role then is to dig deeper, receive the reports, approach it from any report from a trauma-informed action perspective. And the trauma-informed action perspective means that right away, when you're handling a situation where you think a child has been abused or harmed, you right away understand that that child has been through trauma, no matter how small or big. So that right away puts you in a place as the person who's handling the now concern that has been reported, in a place to care for the child's safety and well-being. So if you're concerned about a teacher, you're going to want to make sure that that child isn't going to that classroom right away in the next 20 minutes. Or, you're thinking about those things. You're gathering information. At this point, you're launching an inquiry. Language is very important, because it's not your job in a school to investigate. That's law enforcement. Your inquiry might lead you, based on what you're handling, to call law enforcement. But at this point, you're gathering information, you're launching the inquiry. you're documenting everything, you're keeping the central record, and then you make a determination, and you're either, you know, taking action if it's an employee, or you're sending, calling in protective services, law enforcement, or you determine that it's inconclusive and you wrap it up and document it. Any questions about this part? So this is probably the hardest part, being a first responder in a school where we all work in a people organization, and really taking that step when you're not quite sure what you're reporting, or if you even have something to report, is hard. And that's why we talked a little bit a few minutes ago, and we'll talk a little bit more about how important it is to establish the ethos of prevention. Any relationships, adult relationships that we have that suffer in the process can be repaired if we're all working towards the same goal. If you're putting the school's reputation ahead of the child's reputation, everybody loses. But school reputation does recover when you've done all the right things and you've taken everything from a child protection perspective. And then we can move on. As you go through the process, it's really important not only to identify those concerns and to be able to report and to build the trust within your school, in your system, and in how you handle any concerns. That's really key, because if your school doesn't handle the disclosures or the reports well, people will be more reluctant to report. And again, everybody loses, but more importantly, the children lose. So, but when you do document and you have a central place, and hopefully, ideally, one central person, then you're seeing patterns of behaviors that emerge. Adults and offenders who want to harm children, they have, research shows, interviews with individuals who've been, accosted. They confirm that they have a history of low-level concerns, a series of low-level concerns. The abuse doesn't happen out of the blue. There's a history of crossing boundaries. There's a history of breaking rules. You heard Debbie say, in big or small ways. So when you have a process where you're building the ethos of prevention, you're making it, you're handling everything with confidentiality, when your responses are very appropriate and proportionate, and you're not overreacting, then people are more likely to report. And then you're documenting and you're seeing patterns. So Sarah, again, back to the student who showed up with a black eye. Sarah reports something that happens again. The first time we didn't have any cause to be concerned, but now it's documented. And then now you see a second concern that was brought up maybe by a different person. So a picture is being painted. Same with a colleague. A student says something about a teacher. You go through your process, it's inconclusive, or you dismiss it. There's no problem that you can detect, but you document it. So the next time that it happens, anything remotely boundary crossing or inappropriate occurs, it's now the second incident. So that's why it's very important to be able to report, to share your concerns, and to document them and look at the patterns over time. We also know that offenders are very, very good at grooming the environment. And again, in reviewing cases where there are interviews with those individuals, they describe in detail how none of that is accidental. They take great care in making sure that there's enough cause around them to allow you to doubt their behavior and their intentions. And so not only are the children groomed, but also the adults are groomed and their parents of the children are groomed. And so again, making it even more important to be able to say something when something doesn't feel right. Make sense? We all have biases. We talk about them in HR when we're interviewing. In the first few seconds of an interview, you connect with people who look like you, act like you, that you can identify with. And so it's the same way with colleagues. You make connections. We work in a people organization. And so we develop those biases, and it makes it very hard for us to even imagine that someone that we know can harm a child. So again, having that ability not to judge, but to do your part and say, you know what, this was wrong, and then move on and make sure that it's handled. Again, we said it before, but it's really important to also remember that abuse is underreported, and those disclosures are rare. And abuse is underreported because, again, children oftentimes don't feel that they'll be believed. All right, we can go to the next slide. We want to maybe break up the monotony of my voice and Debbie's a little bit, and want you to hear from children. We love this video. It's very short. It's just a couple minutes. I'll give you a caveat. It's children speaking to us. It's in different languages, so you're going to watch the subtitles, and they go by pretty fast. But when you get the recording, you can play it and go back. Don't worry if you're not following the subtitles, you'll be able to follow along. It's a nice message from kids and a great reminder. So Debbie will play that now for us. Debbie, I don't think we can see the video.
4% have seen people.
Oh dear, you're not seeing it?
No.
That must be something with my screen share. Okay.
So if you didn't come in right at 6, it's because we've had internet issues. So bear with us for 2 minutes.
You need to stop. You need to stop the share and do a reshare.
Okay, I think I've done that now. Do you see?
Thank you.
You see her? Okay,
no.
I'll start again.
It's not showing, Deb.
Seen people online sharing something about.
Would it be possible to share the link and then give us a couple of minutes to watch it?
I will, I think. She just left us. I think she just got bumped out. That's what was happening. Oh, there she is. Debbie, do you want to just copy and paste the link and drop it in the chat? And then we'll just give them 2 minutes.
Oh, I figured it out. Sorry, what I did was pause the share and instead of full on stop it. So I think I've got it figured out.
Now we've built this video up to monumental pieces, and it's really just a simple video. But we hope you enjoy it.
Okay, give me, okay. I'm sorry for the technical glitch, but I think I've got it now.
So as Debbie pulls this up, you watch it, and then we're going to be sending you to a breakout room with a couple of questions and some opportunities to talk to one another. And then when we come back from the breakout room, we'll debrief a little bit, and then we'll continue with some of the content and the rest of our webinar. Can everybody see here?
Are you seeing YouTube now?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
Have seen people online sharing something about someone's sexual behavior.
29%-uk látta, hogy egy ismerőse szexuális fenyegetést kap online.
But 50% won't tell a teacher as they think they will overreact.
53% har ikke lyst til at fortælle politiet om krænkelsen, fordi de ikke vil involvere deres familie.
43%-uk még a közösségi oldalakon sem jelenteni, mert azt gondolják, hogy úgysem számít.
This is online sexual harassment. So what are we going to do about it?
Jeg vil ikke være den person, der liker et billede, der krænker andre.
Én nem fogok senkit arra kérni, hogy mesztelen képeket küldjön magáról.
I'm not going to be the person who puts disgusting messages in the comment section.
Én senkivel nem fogok úgy bánni, hogy értéktelennek érezze magát.
Én nem fogom hibáztatni az áldozatokat.
Jeg vil ikke være passiv og bare se det ske.
I am going to be the person that tells my peers that online sexual harassment is not okay.
Jeg vil være den person, der hjælper ved at tage snakken face to face.
Én leszek az, aki odafigyel azokra, akiket bántanak.
I'm going to be the person who says that reporting is the right thing to do.
Én leszek az, aki kiáll másokért.
We need your help too.
Støtter os hele vejen igennem, selv hvis du måske tænker, at vi har gjort noget forkert.
To not get angry or overreact if we tell you something that shocks you.
Indhenter viden om de sociale medier, vi bruger, og den digitale arena, vi identificerer os med.
Arra van szükségünk, hogy támogass minket, és ne ítélkezz.
Forklar os, hvilken hjælp der er, og hvordan vi kan få den. To know that you are going to take it seriously, not brush it off.
Azért, hogy biztonságban érezhessük magunkat.
És biztosak lehessünk abban, hogy segíteni fogsz.
Because together, we can do something about it. We can make it stop. Step up, speak up, and put an end to online sexual harassment. For more information, go to dshame.eu.
So this really speaks to very important. I know we tend to talk about, when we talk about institutional abuse, we talk about adults, but we all know that peer-to-peer abuse is very real and it's very harmful, and it's probably something that children may experience at a higher incident rate. So again, whatever is going on, whatever behavior or action that is causing the child to be harmed in any way should be reported and is equally serious.
Are you seeing the slideshow again, just to make sure?
Sorry?
You're seeing the slideshow again?
Yes, I'm seeing the slideshow again. So we can go to the next slide now. All right, so we're going to give you 10 minutes to go into groups. You're going to be in groups of 3 to 4, and hopefully you'll be able to see those questions when you break out. And we know you're going to want to introduce yourselves to each other. Take a couple of minutes and don't spend a lot of time on that, but really reflect on your own context, your own school, what we've been sharing so far, and think about what those behaviors are or actions that would cause you to be concerned about a colleague, what would cause you to be concerned about a child in general, and what barriers do you have in your context that make it difficult to seek advice or report. Those are all important things for us to reflect on. And then we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes.
Please, you'll be in the same breakout groups. We're going to use breakout groups a lot from now on, and you'll be with the same people. So please appoint a reporter who's going to come back and either put some information in the chat related to the questions or can share out with their mic on.
All right, enjoy your breakout room, and we'll see you soon.
I am going to try. I'm going to try and copy these questions, Perry, so that we can, I'll stop my share for a second, and then I'll copy the questions so we can put them in the breakout room. Are you okay, Laura? Is everybody?
Yeah, I'm watching. They're all heading out. Yeah.
Okay. I don't see the, usually I see something on my screen where I can paste into the breakout rooms. You know what? I'll paste it in the chat. Are one of you seeing where you can, all right, those are the questions they're supposed to be asking. Laura or Perry, if one of you could paste that into the breakout room. You know what I mean?
I will do it. I will do it.
Awesome, awesome.
Can I just apologize? I'm still here. I'm Sarah Cook. I'm from ECIS.
Hi, Sarah.
Unfortunately, I have to go suddenly. Can I just thank you so much? This has been an excellent session so far, and I'm sorry that I need to leave, but I'm most grateful to you. It's been a really, really kind of moving.
Sarah, thank you so much, and I really hope that you have access to the slideshow, to the whole recording, so you can continue and reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you.
And we'll keep in touch from the ECIS perspective as partners as well. Thank you very, very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So Debbie, I see, some people are still in here, Laura. Are you assigning them?
I
Yes,
wonder if
but
they had to step away.
yes, and I will go to move the ones that are alone in one room to the other.
Okay.
Cool.
So
right.
Because this has taken a couple of minutes, when everybody's in a room, let's count 10 minutes from that point in time. Does that make sense?
I don't have the right to pause the recording. Do you have that, Perry?
Colleagues, we were going to ask you, we also asked you to reflect on what would cause you to be concerned about a student, and then what are the barriers to reporting. So as you continue to reflect on those questions, I do want to talk to you about one of the reasons why handling low-level concerns is so important. It's because there's lots of research that's out there that I mentioned this before we went to the breakout session. There's a lot of research and a lot of conversations that have been had with individuals who have been accosted. And one of the things that we try to learn is what can we do given their experiences and what they share to help keep children safe. So Marcus Aruga's work in reviewing serious case reviews is very important work, because they looked at 30 cases that were actually tried and completed between the years 2000 and 2016. And they have prominent findings. And then I just want to share with you the highlights of their findings, and it will tie back to the reason why for all of us handling those concerns are so important. But one finding in 17 of the 30 cases, they found that there's been a failure of staff and management to understand and implement safeguarding policies. And so that's really important. And the safeguarding policies are broad. They include things like safer hiring. They include things like reporting. And of course, among that is low-level concerns. So that's one finding that was found. Another finding is in 14 cases, they found that understanding the dynamics of organizational abuse was very important in helping to mitigate some of those risks. And that includes understanding some of the things that we've been talking about today, such as grooming behavior, low-level concerns, among others. So in reviewing those, again, for the benefit of those who've just joined us, in reviewing those 20 serious cases that have been tried, finished, published between 2000 and 2016, this is what we've learned. Some of the things that we've learned. Failure of staff and management to understand and implement safeguarding policies, and the importance of understanding the dynamics of organizational abuse was highlighted in many of those cases, and the significance of organizational culture and minimizing risks was also emphasized. So those three things together really also connect very nicely with our role and responsibilities, everything that we've been talking about today. Our roles as building those ethos of prevention, in handling and noticing and reporting low-level concerns, as well as obviously taking our duty of care and our responsibility as mandated reporters very seriously. So if we will go to the next step, next slide. And we touched upon this just a little bit, but in this slide, we're going to explore a little bit institutional abuse, because we talk about it. So, and in the previous slide, we also know that serious case reviews highlighted how important it is to understand organizational abuse, which is not very different from this. This piece of this information that you have in front of you, it comes from it's data that comes from a study that was funded by the US Department of Justice in 2014, and the data was released in 2018-19. But don't worry, those numbers are still relevant and very much aligned with the numbers today. So, and also very important that I give you some information about this. The data here comes from actual disclosures. So what that means is it's data that was what was the end result of disclosures that were made against institutional abuse offenders, and then they were found and reported and caught, basically. So why is that important for you to know? It's important for you to know because it's the data skews higher, older. We know, again, the research tells us that younger children are less likely to report. So when children do disclose, they tend to be, a little bit older, maybe in their teens. So just the data skews a little bit older. And then we also know that this information does not include peer-on-peer abuse. It's not represented in this data here. It was more about adult institutional abuse. And so we also know that the rates, we talked about this just before we got so rudely interrupted, but we talked about this, that peer-on-peer abuse is way more prevalent. It actually accounts for 1/3 to 1/2 of all sexual abuse cases in children. So, so that's really important for us to know, because when we talk about abuse and we talk about adults, we want you to know about adult behavior, but abuse comes from many different places. It's not just the adults, it's peer-on-peer. It's not just adults who work in schools. Children are vulnerable in general. And so we just need to know that. So we kind of organized the data here for you in 2 different areas. So on the perpetrators or offenders, it gives you some information about when those abuses were disclosed, where they came from. So basically, you can see the numbers for yourselves, but I want to highlight a very important point, and it's that 50% of those who were alleged to have abused children had prior allegations against them. 50%. That's a shocking number, and it's very real. This is a real study, and again, hugely underscores how important it is for us to practice all those things that we've been talking about, to have those policies in place that protect kids. It's not one thing that you do, but it's multiple barriers that you put in place. So if you establish your organization in a way where you have multiple barriers that prevent anybody from harming children, you can mitigate those risks. 3 out of 4 offenders use technology to contact children, and 50% of the time when technology was used, it was a cell phone. So for those of us who have codes of conduct, there should always be something that covers contacting children and the use of technology, or even a policy about that. And that number is well before COVID. Remember, this study was published in 2018-19. Although if you're just joining us now, I did say earlier that those numbers are still correct. When you look at the incidence of misconduct on the other side of the screen, on the right-hand side, 53% of the time that the abuse was disclosed was in a school event or in the school itself. So that's a pretty high incidence rate. And 79% of the misconduct was contact abuse. So there was contact. We talked a little bit earlier about how children who are marginalized or who are vulnerable are more likely, and they have a high incidence rate. And you can see that right here. 49% of those who disclosed come from a minority group. And even among that, 53% come from an economically disadvantaged group. So unfortunately, the documenting sexual abuse is becoming more and more prevalent. So that is happening more. So we are able to document those cases more and more. And I'm sorry that the slide is a little bit cut out here, but what I want you to know also is that the predatory conduct in many cases was observed when it was happening, but it just wasn't reported. So again, just going back and tying that information into everything we've been talking about. So we said it before, abuse is it happens, but it's preventable. And those are the ways in which together we can make sure that we do our parts to prevent some of that. Now I'm going to stop here because I see more of you were able to join. Thank you so much, and our sincere apologies. Just like you, we had no idea why we got bumped out. But I see some questions and I see a hand up. So let me start with Camille because I can see you right now and your hand is up. So let me start with you if you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Perry. It's good to see you guys again. I don't know if I missed when you were beginning to talk about this slide, but I'm wondering about any statistics you might have on the gender of perpetrators in terms of percentages. I can make some assumptions, but I was curious if you have that information.
So I actually don't on this one right now, but I can direct you at the very end of our presentation. We will be sharing with you a resource list. And if you go to the ICMEC educational portal, you can actually see this. This is a snippet, a part of a much bigger picture and study that was done on institutional abuse. And when you unpack it, I want to say, and I can confirm a little bit later, that it's mostly males in this case. And you can see that the reports and disclosures came from mostly females. So if that helps. But the whole report is available, and thank you for, I think that's Laura who put the link right in there. You can find the whole study and it's fascinating to watch. It actually is an infographic. So it's really easy to look at as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Thank you, Camille, for wanting the research behind this, because I think it is easy to operate on assumptions. So it's good to have the numbers. Yeah, we can definitely, I'm writing notes. I think Perry and Laura are also, so we'll send out some information when we send a final email.
Great. And we did make a note to get back to this group about the incidents on false allegations peer-on-peer. So we will circle back with you on that. All right, so, and Camille, you didn't miss too much. I just went through a couple of slides that you'll have access. This is the second slide, so you didn't miss too much. All right, so let me just check the chat. I wanna make sure, if Laura, you can help us if we're missing anybody's questions so that we can move this along and not put everybody way far behind. And we'll move on to the next slide, which Debbie will do. So grooming. We are going to take a minute to talk more about grooming because it does tie into those, this is where, you heard me talk about this before, this is one of the hardest things to detect and to handle. So what is grooming? Grooming really is an intentional act. It's intentional manipulation, and the goal is to build trust, and to build trust in order to gain access and initiate and maintain sexual abuse. That is the goal of grooming. And those actions are, they really are also meant to hide the abuse and prevent discovery. So just knowing that and reflecting on the actual definition is very important. Again, when we unpack research that has considered and taken the comments and interviews of individuals who have been caught, they tell you that they spend a lot of time ensuring that they are managing that process really well so that they don't get discovered. So grooming behaviors, one of the biggest things that that happens is that it erodes boundaries. And then it's a very slow and progressive process. So it's not generally something that happens overnight, it's something that happens over time. And so that's why, as we continue to talk about handling low-level concerns, that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be tuned into that. Because if there's that little indication that something isn't right, we should be listening to that and trying to act on it. It also, as it continues to happen, so those boundaries are eroded. There's a little bit of testing where there's maybe a code of conduct rule that was broken or something that happens. When it happens over time, it actually normalizes inappropriate behavior. So one of the key features of an organization that does really well in handling low-level concerns is that inappropriate behaviors, no matter how big or small, are handled. They're not normalized. So that's really important for us to remember as well. They're not brushed off. And then so those intentional individuals who are intentionally grooming are counting on some of those behaviors to be brushed off and normalized. So that's why it's really important for us to be tuned into that. It's
Uh-oh. Is Perry's frozen for everybody, right? Because I'm seeing other people. Okay, Camille, I see you now.
We're talking about, sorry?
Perry, I'm sorry you froze on us for like 20 seconds.
What's the last thing that you heard me say? Because I can go on.
Normalizing
normalizing.
Not normalizing.
Yeah, so adults who are intentionally grooming are depending on those situations where those inappropriate behaviors are normalized. So one of the most important things that we can do is stay tuned in and not accept and not normalize inappropriate behaviors and handle them when they happen, because then that breaks that cycle. We take the opportunity here to talk about 3 different types of offenders. So when we've been talking about grooming behaviors, and when we talk about individuals who are wanting to harm children purposely for sexual pleasure, we tend to be talking about preferential offenders. Preferential offenders know that they have a sexual interest in children, and then they act deliberately, want to have access and groom and do all those things to make sure that they have and maintain access for sexual abuse. A little bit separate from that is situational offenders. Situational offenders may have other interests. They're not necessarily interested in children, or they actually may have triggers that cause them to harm a child. So the difference here is that they don't know and they're not aware of a specific interest in a child, but the triggers or the situation itself makes that opportunity available. So they're situational. And then kind of similar to that are opportunistic offenders. And they are individuals who may be hypersexual, and a child may just provoke that or provide another sexual outlet. We also know that others may harm children, whether they're situational or opportunistic offenders. It could be a time of great emotional distress when thinking has been impaired or severely distorted, or when perhaps their normal coping mechanisms with severe emotional anxiety is overwhelmed. And so they sometimes can act out in those ways. So that's really important for us to know, because oftentimes I can tell you in my world, in human resources, when we interview, there really isn't one way or one thing that you can do to detect an adult who either intentionally wants to harm children or is situational or opportunistic. The best measure is to have those multiple barriers in place and to build the ethos of adults that are around you and in your school who share the same ethos of prevention. So we can move on from that. Let me stop and see if you have any questions. I know just before the break, someone was asking a very specific question about that really had to do with neglect. So if you're back, we can take those questions in a minute. But until then, what we'll do is I'll hand it over to Debbie, so we can just dive into what you can do and what schools can do. And bear with us, because sometimes we repeat information, and that's done intentionally because we want to highlight some of those very important things that can be done. Debbie, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Barry. So establishing the right culture. The first thing to emphasize here is train everyone and be transparent in your processes. So I'll train all staff and all people who work with students. That includes your outside coaches, volunteers, host families. Just train everyone who works with students through your school. Train them on your definitions of abuse, how to report concerns, what will be done once concerns are reported, and that's the transparency piece. Train them on your code of conduct. That is a really easy training that all schools should be doing. If you have a code of conduct that you ask people to sign, don't just email it out and get email responses. Spend some meeting time, make sure that the code of conduct is translated into all appropriate languages, and make sure that everyone understands it and has a chance to ask questions before they sign, because understanding your code of conduct is a huge piece of the child protection puzzle. And I have to apologize if you're hearing anything in the background. That's my son's trumpet practice. It wasn't supposed to clash with this meeting, but thank you all for staying late to be with us, and you get serenaded by my son. Please also, when you are training and working with students, use trauma-informed practice, which involves an ongoing awareness of how traumatic experiences might affect children, families, and the human services professionals who serve them. Another way to make sure you're establishing the right culture is that you're offering multiple reporting pathways, including an anonymous reporting pathway. The anonymous reporting pathway, a couple of suggestions there. It might be an online form that doesn't ask for any identifying information. It might be a safe number that people can text, but any way that people can report without fearing retribution. Another way to establish the child protection culture is share or develop a whistleblower policy that protects staff who report and protects others from reports made in bad faith. You know, I don't know if we mentioned this. I'm sorry, I'm gonna step away from this for a second. We will share these slides with you. So you will have these slides as a reference afterwards, in case we didn't say that at the beginning. Okay, another way.
Debbie, can we stop for a second? Can everybody hear us? Because there's someone in the chat that cannot hear us.
I can hear you.
Okay. If you...
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. If you just unmute and let us know that you can hear us. So
Tanya said that she can.
Oh, you can hear us now. Great.
Yes.
Thank you, Tina.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. So sorry about the technology today.
Yeah. Apologies. You know, I think if anything, COVID has...
I was in the meeting with the dog.
I think COVID has leveled the playing field as far as all of us like expecting the unexpected. So thank you all for being here and working through this with us. And then just again, as far as establishing the right culture, we don't want the question to be, what if I'm wrong and I'm reporting something that isn't a problem? We want the question to be, what if I'm right? Okay, examining your context. It's very important for educators and schools to constantly scan the environment for risk factors. And it's equally important for us to put everything in the right context and consider our own unique circumstances as a school. Look at where you are in your journey towards child protection. Make sure you're bringing people along. Think about where you're operating as a country, what your laws are, everything that affects you uniquely as a school. What's your local culture? How does that impact your work? Where are you vulnerable? Consider auditing your child protection policies. And there are, at the final slide in this presentation, which again we'll share with you, has links to a bunch of audit tools you can use to look at your school's policies and make sure that they're where you want them to be. And everybody is on a journey as far as establishing a school that has an ethos of child protection. So don't worry if, sorry, now there's a doorbell and my dog's in the background. I'm very sorry. So yeah, don't worry where you are in your journey. Just figure out where you are and where you want to get to. And there's tools on ICMEC Ed Portal to do all of this with you. And the audit tools are a great way to look at where you are, where you want to be, and see some of the steps that you might take to get there.
One of, if I can step in, Debbie, one of the most important things as you examine your context is really understand the culture of your students, of your host country, of the parents, and really try to meet. And I think this will, if someone here was the person that asked about neglect, really try to understand and not judge. So we may come from, may see a practice, corporal punishment is a very good example. We may see a practice that we know is harmful to children, but we also know that in the country in which we live and work, it may be a practice that's acceptable or even legal. You heard me at the very beginning say only 10% of the children worldwide are protected from corporal punishment legally. So when you have those cases, it's very important to, as Debbie said, to bring people along and not judge someone's culture, but try to find a way to get on the same page where you all share the same goal. I can guarantee you that in most cases, the adults will want or will even have some things in place to protect children, or they will want to protect children. So find that common ground and work with people and bring them with you on the same page, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Perry. Okay, so how do we mitigate the risks? There's a lot to digest in these bullet points. As educators, school administrators, board members, whatever our role is in the school, it's important to reflect on the risks and challenges and consider what we can do to mitigate those risks. There isn't one single thing that can be done on its own. Protection of children is about ensuring that you have multiple systems in place, including policies and procedures. So here's a few to consider. Safer hiring practices. Those help you ensure you're doing what you can to screen in those who will share your ethos of prevention and screen out adults who might be harmful. Establishing a culture of prevention where any concerns reported and where community members are trained and feel safe in doing so and trust that the report will be handled appropriately. When that's in place, training can extend to the community, and that includes students and parents. 2 lessons here. Do implement a child protection curriculum, but don't do it until you have some other policies in place as to how you're going to handle reports. Because I made this mistake so that you don't have to. We put in a child protection curriculum very quickly at our school as part of implementing a child protection policy, and the reports started coming and we weren't totally ready to handle them. So as soon as you do implement a child protection curriculum, your kids are going to start telling you things. So be ready for your children to start telling you things as you get that child protection curriculum in place. Also, as far as educating parents, a note there, that is one of the best prevention activities you can do for your own benefit and for the students' benefit. Because if parents know what you consider abuse and how you handle reports, then when you come to them and say, your child told me this and I need to talk to you about it, you're not coming out of the blue. Those parents are expecting you and they're ready to have a conversation and they're open to hearing from you. So talking to parents about your child protection policies is one of the best things. Like your future self will thank your past self if you've done that when you need to talk to those parents because you have a concern.
Debbie, very similarly with the code of conduct, as you establish the code of conduct, it's very important to bring people along and include their perspective and voices, because then you have a better opportunity and chance for them to follow the code of conduct. And adopting one thing that we do at schools constantly, because we support each other, and so we borrow things and checklists and sometimes we borrow like handbooks. Again, don't when the stakes are so high and it involves protecting children, do borrow, but do make it your own and make sure that you contextualize it with your own context and your own dynamics. Your school and your people and you yourself, everybody around you has to be ready, and they have to be prepared for that journey wherever you are.
Perfect. And yeah, make sure everybody understands the policies. So train, train, train. Establish a single point of contact. Perry went over this, a single point of contact to receive concerns. This is an important step in establishing patterns of low-level concern reporting. This ensures the process is triggered consistently and appropriately. And finally, establish a central record, well, where all reports of concerns are filed. Schools need a document for reporting concerns and a safe place to file such a document. They're on the final slide in here. There's links to resources for both documenting concerns and the central record, if you haven't established those already. So I just want to go over this chart briefly. This is what it looks like, the entire concern response. So these are steps that help your school effectively handle responses to any concern that's lodged, whether it's a disclosure, an allegation, or a low-level concern. In a nutshell, steps 1, 2, and 3 are related to the actions taken when a concern is reported, and 4 and 5 are steps you take after the process to evaluate and continue to improve your responses. So a low-level concern might hover between steps 1 and 2 for a while until several concerns are documented, and then that paints a picture of a more serious issue, or the victim might disclose, and then you're starting to move it further along the steps. If there's any questions about this process, feel free to ask them or put them in the chat. Okay. With that, we would like to move on, and we'll just do one case study with you. And I'm wondering, there's 11 of us in here. What do you think, Perry? Should we do breakout rooms or should we just keep it in here? Maybe just keep it in here, huh? Okay, I see some nodding. All right, thumbs up. Okay, so let's do that. So this is a true case. 3 female students tell you that a male teacher, Mr. White, makes us feel uncomfortable. Mr. White looks at them longer than they feel is appropriate and sometimes says things that feel too personal. When asked for examples, the students say it's really hard to pin down why they feel what he says and does makes them uncomfortable. It just does. So you can either turn off your mic and answer these questions verbally, or you can put in the chat. What's your initial reaction to this information? What, if any, follow-up will you do? And what will you tell the students who reported this to you?
This might not be in order, essentially, but
it's fine.
Yeah. So initially, I feel like maybe I could talk to the student a little longer, or ask the student a few more other questions, because it seems like I'm not trying to like direct her answers, but at the same time, maybe I could ask her something like, can you think of a time when this feeling of discomfort happened? Or, kind of ease in, because it seems like maybe there is something there, but I don't really have enough information at this point to do anything. And I guess it's step 2 or 1. I don't know.
The response.
Yeah, my initial reaction is that I need to know a little bit more. I need to know a lot more.
Okay, good.
Are you at this point feeling any concern? So again, remember the conversations that we've had. So the 2 questions really that you should, when it's so vague, because oftentimes that's exactly what happens when it's a low-level concern. You don't have evidence and you're not quite sure. So you're asking yourself 2 questions. What if they're wrong, but what if they're right? And so then that kind of leads you to start thinking about are you actually concerned or not? Does that make sense?
I see in the chat, making the students feel comfortable, making them be listened to and not minimize. Good. I think reassuring. So in this case, it was 3 female students coming together saying the same thing, that they all 3 feel uncomfortable with this teacher. And So yeah, it's important to let them know that you're hearing them, that you're taking this seriously, and that they did the right thing by telling you. It's always one of the most important things you can do when a student reports something to you is, or even an adult, that they did the right thing by telling you.
So Debbie, again, remember, go back to the video that we shared where the students were telling you they want to be believed, because it's so hard for them to come forward. And so when they do come forward and say anything, it's important, even if it doesn't amount to anything at the end, it's very important for them to feel that you have their attention, and that you're taking it seriously and you're not brushing it off. So what are we doing with this next, Debbie?
So that
we lost Debbie now. Can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Oh, now we can. You're back.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay, good. Okay, good. I see you all, so I think it's live. Okay, so in this case, at this school, the director is someone who takes child protection very seriously and does have an ethos of that they are a school that takes child protection seriously. So the director did speak with the teacher and mentioned the concern that had been brought to her. So then, and asked him just to be very careful in how he deals with students, that he is doing his best to not make his female students feel like he's dealing with them in any way differently than he does with his male students. So then a few weeks later, 2 students, one of whom was part of the initial reporting group, shares a screenshot that shows that Mr. White liked a post by a former student who's still in secondary school, but in another country, is no longer going to this school. The post is several months old, and it shows a picture of the former student dressed up to go out for the evening. The students felt uncomfortable that Mr. White liked the post because on the platform where the picture was posted, someone has to be friends with another person to see their posts. And Mr. White and the former student are not friends. Are not friends on that platform. So the only way for Mr. White to have seen that post was if he searched for the student by name. So what are your questions at this point? And what actions might you take? And again, what will you tell the 2 students who are reporting to you?
And we're not sending you to breakout rooms.
Yeah, if you just joined, we're not going to go to breakout rooms. Please just turn off your mic and speak, or put it in the chat. And I do see some taking notes.
Is it possible?
Document, yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Sorry to bother you. I deal with kindergarten children. I have 3-year-olds. So it's a pretty Italian. So they come to an international school. And obviously we don't get the conversation as high as this level with the students, no? So, but I do have some that I'm having problems, that I have parents that are splitting up, for example, and the children are having, well, one child in my class this year, we're having a lot of problems, and I'm trying to deal with it, make, like you said, make her feel comfortable, and try and get more information every day, just a little bit more, asking her in Italian, obviously, what she does with mommy, or where's daddy, just questions like these, easy ones that a 3-year-old child could try and tell me, but it's pretty difficult with this age. But yeah, I just thought that I'm hearing all the conversations. Obviously, I think it's for the older children, more or less, yeah, you're talking about.
Actually, thank you. That's a very good point. Earlier, we were talking about how important it is when you are noticing a concern that comes from a student, that you're really paying attention to developmentally where they are, because depending on how old they are, they're sharing information with you if when you ask them those open-ended questions, so you can determine if you should be concerned. It's very important to understand what they are able to share with you depending on how old they are. So you're absolutely right. They also sometimes use words that
Exactly.
mean something to them and they don't really translate into the adult world. So
Exactly.
it's those you're doing exactly everything you should be doing is asking open-ended questions. And then you follow that up with something just a little bit more specific, open-ended, and then back to specific, because that teases out the information. When kids don't want to tell you something, if they don't want to tell you something and you keep asking them, they either clamp up and stop talking to you, or they recant. Even if they tell you something, they take it back.
Exactly.
So,
but I've noticed this year, this year we have is the 3-year-olds, for example, in my case, the COVID situation. The last 2 years, these children haven't been to school. They are horrific. They have so many issues. I've never had 24 children in one class, that so many children have issues in lots of different ways, and it's very, very difficult this year, and it's a lot to do. I find I have one girl that comes to school and her father, in front of me and my other colleague, kisses her on the mouth with the tongue in the mouth. I mean, what do? It's disgusting. I mean, he's done it twice, this father, and then, like me and my colleague, what do we do about it? It's a difficult situation.
So if you're, again, this is hard to answer without, this is a perfect example of taking your local context into the response. So you would have to, we would have to understand the culture of that family and what is appropriate and what isn't. And then also your local laws about reporting and the thresholds for reporting such actions. So those are very important when you consider those cases.
I mean, Italians, I'm English, I'm from London, and I'm not saying we're not affectionate, because we are, but we don't, in England, we don't kiss people on the mouth, not even mum and dad. We don't do that in England, not generally. But here in Italy, Spain, I lived in Spain for 25 years, Athens, Paris, here, because I used to be an air stewardess. And now for 15 years, I've been teaching. And I've noticed that the Italians are very, especially the fathers with their little girls, it's sometimes disturbing to see it, because I'm not used to it. Really is.
So
whether you should worry.
And that's where it's, sorry. I was just going to say, that's where it's super helpful to have a diverse child protection team that includes people from the local culture, so that they're helping you to understand what's cultural and what needs to be addressed as a concern.
And again, and it's also important to, no matter how we feel about the action itself, I think it's really important to put that aside when you deal with the parents, so that you can have the best opportunity to get on the same page. And
it was very uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is the word. It was uncomfortable to look and watch, especially twice in a row to see it. It was like concerning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's you have the right, and have the right to be concerned, of course.
I was going to say earlier about with the younger students, that is where you more often are reading their behaviors and just keeping an eye on behaviors rather than waiting for them to tell you something. So
exactly.
Yeah. And also just when we talked about the statistics for false reporting, the younger they are, the less likely they are to give you a false statement. So remember when we said it's below 3%, it's closer to the 1% only of all allegations when they're younger. So the best thing you can do is keep talking to the child, not pressuring the child, and gathering that information. Yes.
Exactly. Because we do at school, we do 3 the year observation forms about the child, and to a psychologist that's at school and evaluates the situation. So the progress from day 1 up to the end of the year. So a lot of issues, a lot of things. So this is how these.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that, Tina.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Tina, you're breaking up. But
Okay.
I think we got most of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Clarissa, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Clarissa, I mistyped your name in the chat, but you are, yes. Yeah, very well said. Okay. So as far as this case where now the teacher has liked a photo that he had to search to find, do you have further concerns or questions? Totally. Okay, good. Well, I will. So did the school. So the director then met with Mr. White to discuss the code of conduct, which he had signed, stating he wouldn't interact with students, including former students, on social media until after the students had graduated from secondary school. So you tell the teacher that you know he liked a post by a former student, and you remind him of the previous report that other students have told you he made them feel uncomfortable in the way that he looked at them. So the director then asks the teacher if he feels he's violated the code of conduct, and he says he admits it. And this is true. Again, this is true. He says he's been very lonely during the COVID lockdowns. He's a young single male. He's been drinking too much during lockdowns, and he has had inappropriate thoughts about students, and he thinks he should go home and get help. So what are your concerns at this point? If he's resigning from the school, he's going to go back to his home country and seek help. Do you have any concerns? Is this resolved? Do you feel like you need to make any further actions? And again, what might you tell the students? I think I can, I'll tell you what the school did, and then you can think if there's anything else that you might add to this. So with guidance from an attorney, the school's attorney, the director wrote a letter to the school community announcing Mr. White's resignation and reminding everyone if they have concerns about the behavior of anyone at the school, they should share their concerns with the staff member. The students were assured that they did the right thing in sharing their concerns, and the counselor followed up with each of the students who had reported to see if they had any other concerns about this teacher. And all teachers at the school from pre-K through to graduation were asked to teach the child protection lessons about recognizing unsafe situations and talking to trusted adults. Once Mr. White left the school, the director verified that he did make it home and home to his home country, and that he was enrolled in appropriate therapy. To date, the director hasn't received any reference requests from Mr. White. Is there anything else that you think the school should do at this point? And this is all, like, don't feel like you're being critical. This is always a learning experience for everybody. So if there's anything that you can think of that the school might do, I might pass it on to them.
So in this is a case where it actually progressed. That's one that Debbie picked because it progressed from a low-level concern at the very beginning to where actually, as events unfolded over time, there was that initial person who heard from the 3 students did have cause to be concerned. And so that's why we chose it. And of course, obviously it's anonymized. So those names are of course not accurate, and parts of it have been changed around just a little bit. So we've shared with you, Debbie has shared from the initial concern all the way down to how it unfolded and all the actions that the school took. Are we fairly satisfied, or is there anything else that can be done? And that's not a quiz, by the way.
And so we actually had 3 cases ready to share with you, and the other 2, unfortunately, were not as successful. I chose this one to go first because it is a situation where this director is on it. She understands child protection. She has been behind the movement since it started at international schools. She has made sure that her school is a place where everybody knows that she takes concerns very seriously. And this is not the only teacher that she has dismissed during her tenure because of concerns. And in all cases, she has been proven right. So there are people who are critical of her and say, you know, you're out to get teachers, but she's not. In all cases, she has protected her community from a teacher who was looking to do harm.
So in this case, we can, as we unpack it, we can see that the actions taken at the time seem to follow the procedures and the important milestones that we've been discussing. So when there was an initial concern, somebody in that school did something right and reported to the director. Remember, that's what we've been talking about. Low-level concerns, something doesn't feel right, you're not quite sure. Best thing to do is to report, because you come from a place of what if they're right. So that happened. The teacher was spoken to. That conversation was documented. There was no evidence, anything further. So they moved on. And then but it was documented. So when a few weeks later, the concern came back again, what we established right there is a pattern of behavior. And so with that pattern, that teacher has nowhere else to go, because now it's 2 incidents. And so there was, in this case, follow through. There was some disclosure. So then the follow-up from the school moved from low-level concern to the child protection designate actually launching an inquiry, looking at any evidence that they can gather, taking action, and also taking a trauma-informed approach where they ensured the student's safety by making sure that the teacher was removed. They also cared about the victims over reputation, because they sent a message out. They didn't hide it. They sent a message out and opened the door to receive any, additional disclosures so that they can ensure that their kids are safe. So they actually went all through the right steps so far. And then the teacher, the only thing that I would wonder about is, and that many schools struggle with, is when you've come to this space and then the teacher or the adult or the individual does disclose that they were in a bad space or that they potentially had bad thoughts. What do you do? That's very difficult to handle. So when you let somebody resign, does that mean that, are you confident that they won't go on and do something like this again? Being in therapy is important, but we don't know the outcome. Once they leave your school and your organization, you really can't follow them. So all you have is what you've documented and what you have said to the individual that you will say when asked about references. Again, chances are if they leave, if they're in an overseas location and they go to a different country, oftentimes, unfortunately, references aren't checked. So that's one thing I would wonder about, is the decision to let one person resign over a termination. But again, you just don't know what the circumstances were. And how, also the other thing I would wonder about is how you would have documented the reason why he left on record, so that when the director is gone and the people who were there when the incident happened leave, there's something on record. Another piece of information that we know, because it's so hard for children to disclose, oftentimes disclosures come, and we're seeing that. This is the whole Me Too movement, and disclosures are coming when individuals are adults. And so that's why it's really important to keep some records, because if something does come back, you need to have some historical data. So those are the things I would just wonder about and think about.
Awesome. And Clarissa has said in the chat that we should involve parents. And yes, absolutely, Clarissa, I agree. Don't worry about mistakes.
Don't worry about your typing. I have thick fingers.
We're not judging. But yeah, No, you're absolutely right that it's important to teach parents the limits that we have, and help them to understand what we expect of our teachers and what we expect of our parents in the community. And again, this case is really meant to show, like, if you have an ethos at your school that supports low-level concern reporting, this is the outcome you can expect. That hopefully this teacher did not have the chance to harm students. And so far, that's what we believe, that this teacher did not have the chance to harm students. So if you can get to this point where you're taking low-level concern seriously, you can avoid so much harm to our students. So
other things to consider, if that person was a teacher in a previous school, sometimes when you receive information like that, you do want to go back and review the references and maybe talk to the previous school, but all that happens with the person's knowledge as well. So we're gonna, obviously we skipped through because we ran out of time because of the technical difficulty. So we will wrap it up today with just by ending and thanking you so much for coming and for your engagement, and also for bearing with us as we were all dropped out and came back. Know that you're not in this alone. We're all here together as an international community, and we're here to support each other. We talked about borrowing ideas and checklists and you know, using each other as thought partners, of course, obviously always with your own local context lens. But we want to leave you with this very important resource slide, which you'll have access to. It will take you, the first bullet will take you right to ICMEC's educational portal, and a wealth of information, everything from checklists to, you know, to policies and procedures, to serious cases that you can read through and understand a little bit better. And then the second bullet here is it's an amazing document. It's guidance that's been written up by Ferrer and Company out of the UK, specifically about low-level concerns. If you do nothing else and you want to dive a little bit deeper into low-level concerns, please go and read this document. It's not too hard to read, and it was the basis for most of our content today. And again, lots of information, so please feel free. It's all totally accessible to you at no charge, and it's constantly being updated. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for your attention, and we hope to see you in future webinars.